The wagon train left Ellie Washington to die in the desert because she couldn't walk and they wouldn't carry her another mile. The morning sun painted the Arizona dirt the color of dried blood. Smoke signals twisted against the pale sky 3 miles east. Apache territory. The oxen stamped and snorted, sensing the fear that rippled through the circle of covered wagons. Dutch van der Linde stood on a wooden crate, his voice carrying over the restless livestock. The man wore authority like a well-tailored coat. His eyes swept the faces of the settlers, landing on each person with calculated precision. "We got maybe 2 days of water left," Dutch said, Apache closing in from the east. "Trail ahead gets rougher." Ellie pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. She sat in the back of the Johnson's wagon, her useless legs tucked beneath her. The wooden planks pressed against her spine. Every bump in the trail sent fire through her bones. "Some of us ain't gonna make it," Dutch continued. "That's the truth nobody wants to hear." Mrs. Johnson shifted uncomfortably on the wagon seat. Her husband kept his eyes on the horizon. They'd been kind to Ellie for 3 weeks. Kindness had its limits. "I can help," Ellie called out. "I know medicine. I can treat wounds, set bones." Dutch's gaze found her. Something cold flickered in his expression. "Help requires moving, miss. Moving requires legs that work." The words hit like stones. Ellie had heard worse. She'd survived worse. "I treated little Sarah's fever," she said. "Stopped the bleeding when Mr. Peterson cut his hand. And we're grateful." Dutch's voice carried false warmth. "But gratitude don't change facts." The circle of faces turned toward her. Some looked away. Others stared with the hollow gaze of people making impossible choices. Children pressed against their mothers' skirts. The wind carried the scent of dust and desperation. "We're burning daylight," Dutch said. "Time to vote." Ellie's chest tightened. She'd known this moment would come. Known it since the accident 2 weeks back when the wagon wheel caught that boulder and she'd been thrown clear. Since she'd woken up feeling nothing below her waist. Since she'd become what Dutch called dead weight. All in favor of making hard choices. Hands rose slowly. Mrs. Johnson's fingers trembled as she lifted her arm. Her husband's jaw worked like he was chewing bitter root. One by one, the hands went up. 23 hands, 23 votes for survival. Ellie counted each. 1. Memorized the faces. She wouldn't beg. Wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Motion carries. Dutch stepped down from his crate. "We'll leave supplies. Water for a day, some food." "You're sentencing me to death," Ellie said. "I'm saving 23 lives." Dutch's voice carried no emotion. "Sometimes that's how it works." The camp dissolved into motion. Wagons creaked to life. Oxen lowed and strained against their yokes. Mrs. Johnson pressed a small bundle into Ellie's hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "There's jerky," she whispered. "Some hardtack, I'm sorry," Ellie nodded. "You got children to think about." The wagon rolled away. Ellie sat in the dust, watching her world disappear into the heat shimmer. The bundle contained maybe 2 days of food. The water jug held less. She dragged herself to the shade of a dead mesquite tree. The bark felt rough against her back. Above her, buzzards circled in lazy spirals, patient as death. The sun climbed higher. Heat pressed down like a physical weight. Ellie rationed the water, taking small sips that barely wet her lips. She'd learned patience during the war. Learned to make nothing last as long as possible. On the second day, fever took hold. She drifted in and out of consciousness, dreaming of green fields and cool rivers, of walking through tall grass with her father, of hands that could heal and legs that could carry her anywhere. The third day brought clarity, the kind that comes when death sits close enough to touch. Ellie counted her heartbeats, felt her pulse flutter like a bird's wing. The water was gone. The food was gone. Only the waiting remained. She closed her eyes and listened to the desert silence. Somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats drummed against the hardpan. Getting closer, Ellie opened her eyes. A rider approached from the west, tall man on a bay horse, moving with purpose. He wore a hat pulled low and a coat that had seen better years. The horse stopped 10 feet away. The rider dismounted and approached slowly. His boots crunched on the gravel. Gray stubble covered his jaw. His eyes held the wariness of a man who'd seen too much. "You're alive," he said. "For now." Ellie's voice came out as a whisper. The man knelt beside her. His hands were scarred, calloused from hard work. He tilted the empty water jug and frowned. "How long you been here?" 3 days. He studied the wagon tracks in the dirt. His expression darkened. "I know these wheel marks. Dutch van der Linde's train. You know Dutch? We got history." The man stood and walked to his horse. He returned with a canteen and a piece of salt pork. "Arthur Morgan." "Ellie Washington." Arthur helped her drink. The water tasted like salvation. The meat was tough but filled the hollow spaces inside her. "Can you travel?" he asked. "I can't walk." Wasn't asking about walking. Arthur lifted her onto his horse. His movements were gentle but efficient. A man used to handling fragile things. Ellie gripped the saddle horn as he mounted behind her. "Where are you taking me?" "My ranch. It ain't much, but it's got walls and a roof." The horse turned west toward the distant mountains. Behind them, the buzzards circled emptiness. Ahead lay uncertainty. But uncertainty was better than dying. Alone in the desert. Arthur's ranch sat in a valley between 2 low hills. The house was small but solid. Corrals held a few dozen cattle. A windmill turned slowly in the afternoon breeze. He carried her inside and placed her on a narrow bed. The room was clean but sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace. The walls held no decoration except a faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes. "Rest," Arthur said. "We'll figure the rest out later." Ellie closed her eyes and slept without dreams. Ellie woke to the sound of coffee boiling and boots on wooden floors. Dawn light filtered through a single window, casting long shadows across the room. Her body ached from 3 days in the desert, but she was alive. Arthur stood at the stove, his back to her. Steam rose from a battered pot. He moved with the careful precision of a man who lived alone. Every motion deliberate, every step measured. She pushed herself up on her elbows. The bed creaked. Arthur turned, his face unreadable in the morning light. "You need to eat," he said. "I need to earn my keep." Arthur set a plate on the table. Beans and cornbread. Simple food that smelled better than anything she'd tasted in weeks. He waited while she dragged herself from the bed to the chair. Her arms burned from the effort. "Don't have much use for someone who can't walk," he said. The words hung in the air between them. Ellie had heard variations of this speech before. The polite rejection. The gentle dismissal. She'd learned to read the signs. "I can do plenty without walking." Arthur's eyes held skepticism. Fair enough. She'd have to prove herself. After breakfast, she pulled herself outside. The ranch spread out before her under a sky the color of old pewter. Cattle grazed in the distance. The windmill turned with a steady rhythm that spoke of water and life. Arthur was mending fence near the corral. His movements were efficient but tired. A man fighting a losing battle against time and weather. Ellie watched him work, studying the way he favored his left shoulder, the slight hitch in his step. She dragged herself to the corral fence. The cattle moved restlessly. Several showed signs of sickness, drooping heads, labored breathing. She'd seen it before during the war. Different animals, same symptoms. "Your cattle are sick," she called out. Arthur stopped hammering. "What?" "The spotted one by the water trough. The black one near the gate. They got respiratory distress." Arthur walked over. His face showed doubt mixed with interest. You know cattle? I know sickness. Ellie pulled herself up using the fence rails. During the war, I treated horses, mules, whatever needed healing. Arthur studied the animals she'd pointed out. His expression shifted as he recognized the signs. What's the cure? Willow bark tea, feverfew if you can find it. Keep them separated from the healthy ones. Arthur's shoulders relaxed slightly. You really know medicine. Learned from my father. He was a doctor before the war. The morning passed in careful negotiation. Arthur would test her knowledge. She would prove her worth. Neither spoke of the arrangement directly. Both understood. The terms. By afternoon, 3 sick cattle were separated and receiving treatment. Ellie had identified 2 more showing early symptoms. Arthur watched her work with grudging respect. You can't keep living in the house, he said. People talk. People talked when they left me to die. Ellie's voice carried no bitterness, just fact. Didn't seem to bother them much. Arthur's jaw tightened. He'd been thinking the same thing. Propriety mattered less than survival out here. But the outside world had different rules. There's a small room off the barn, he said. Has a cot and a stove. You'd have privacy. I'd have shelter, Ellie met his gaze. That's more than I had 3 days ago. Arthur nodded. He carried her belongings to the barn while she supervised the cattle treatments. The room was small but clean. A narrow window looked out toward the mountains. She could do worse. That evening, Arthur brought her a plate of stew. He sat on a wooden crate while she ate. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. 2 people learning to share space. Dutch left you because you couldn't walk, Arthur said. Dutch left me because I'm a burden. You saved my cattle today. Don't seem like much of a burden. Ellie set down her spoon. You can't read, can you? Arthur's face went stone still. She'd touched something raw. Something he kept hidden. Saw you looking at the medicine bottles, she continued. The way you study the labels without opening them. Arthur stood abruptly. That ain't your concern. It is if I'm going to help you run this ranch. The words hung between them, a challenge, an offer. Arthur's hands clenched and unclenched. Pride warred with necessity. I know enough, he said. You know how to work. You know how to fix things. You know how to survive. Ellie's voice was gentle but firm. But you can't read bills. Can't write letters. Can't keep proper records. Arthur's jaw worked. What are you proposing? I teach you to read. You teach me to ranch. The proposition sat between them like a loaded gun. Arthur stared at the mountains, thinking. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Why would you do that? Because we both got something the other needs. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I never learned as a child. Too busy. Working, too busy running. Not too late to learn now. That night, Arthur brought her a box of supplies, medicine bottles, seed packets, a worn Bible, things with words on them. We start with these, Ellie said. Arthur pulled up the wooden crate, sat close enough to see the labels. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the first bottle. This one, Ellie said, pointing to a word. What do you think it says? Arthur squinted at the letters. Laudanum. Laudanum for pain. Ellie's finger moved to the next word. This one, T-I-N-C-T-U-R-E, tincture, means it's dissolved in alcohol. They worked by lamplight until Arthur's eyes grew heavy. The words came slowly, but they came. Years of shame began to crack open. Tomorrow we work on writing, Ellie said. Arthur nodded. Tomorrow I'll show you how to handle the horses. The bargain was struck, 2 outcasts finding common ground. The desert wind rattled the barn walls, but inside, something new was taking root. Arthur blew out the lamp and left her in darkness. Through the small window, stars wheeled overhead. The same stars that had watched her nearly die 3 days ago. The same stars that would watch her learn to live again. She closed her eyes and listened to the cattle settling for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, she had shelter and purpose. It was enough. Arthur needed supplies. The ranch was running low on everything: coffee, salt, medicine. For the cattle, he hitched the wagon and prepared for the ride to Deadwood Springs. Ellie watched from the barn doorway. She'd been at the ranch for 2 weeks now. Long enough to see the worry lines deepen around Arthur's eyes. Long enough to understand that money was scarce and problems were mounting. "Get what you need," she said. "Don't worry about the cost." Arthur's hands stilled on the wagon harness. "I pay my own way. I know you do." The morning air carried the scent of dust and approaching storm. Arthur climbed onto the wagon seat. His jaw was set in the hard line she'd learned to recognize. Pride and stubbornness wrapped together. "Be back by evening," he said. The wagon rolled down the valley road. Ellie watched until it disappeared behind the hills. Then she turned back to her work. The cattle were improving. The reading lessons were progressing. Small victories in a world that didn't offer many. Arthur reached Deadwood Springs as the sun climbed toward noon. The town squatted in the desert like a collection of weathered bones. False-fronted buildings lined a single street. Dust devils danced between the structures. He tied the wagon. In front of Peterson's general store, the building was solid timber and stone. Peterson had money behind him. More money than most folks in these parts could account for. Arthur pushed through the front door. The bell above it gave a mournful ring. Peterson looked up from his ledger. His expression shifted from welcome to something colder. "Arthur Morgan. Peterson." Arthur set his list on the counter. "Need supplies." Peterson studied the paper without touching it. "Heard you got yourself a house guest." "Heard lots of things. Most of them ain't true." "This one is, though." Peterson's voice carried an edge. "Dutch van der Linde's been asking about you." Arthur's hands went still. The Dutch, the name carried weight in these parts. Weight and trouble. "Dutch got business with me. He can write out and state it." Peterson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dutch is the mayor now. Mayors got different ways of conducting business." The store's back door opened. Dutch van der Linde stepped through, moving with the confidence of a man who owned the ground he walked on. He was bigger than Arthur remembered. Softer around the middle, but harder in the eyes. "Arthur." Dutch's voice was silk over steel. "Been meaning to visit. Here I am." Dutch picked up a bag of flour from the counter, hefted it, set it down again. "You found something in the desert. Something that belonged to my wagon train. Found a woman left to die. Didn't know she belonged to anybody. She was a burden then, still a burden now." Dutch's eyes never left Arthur's face. "Question is, why would you take on someone else's burden?" Arthur felt the weight of the moment. The choice that would define everything that followed. "Maybe I don't see her as a burden. Then you're a fool." The words hung in the air. Other customers had stopped their shopping to listen. News would spread fast in a town this size. Arthur had just drawn a line in the sand. "That woman is costing you," Dutch continued. "Costing you respect. Costing you business. Going to cost you more before it's done." Peterson nodded along with Dutch's words. "Can't extend credit to someone who makes poor choices, Arthur. Bad. For business." Arthur looked at his supply list. Simple things, necessities. Without credit, he couldn't afford half of what he needed. The ranch was barely surviving as it was. "You bring that woman back to town," Dutch said. "We'll find a place for her. Somewhere appropriate. She's fine where she is." Dutch's smile was sharp as a blade. "No, Arthur, she's not fine. And neither are you, not anymore." Arthur left the store with a quarter of what he needed. The other merchants gave him the same treatment. Cold shoulders, closed doors. Word had spread fast. He drove the wagon to the edge of town and stopped. The mountains rose in the distance, purple shadows against the sky. His ranch lay beyond them. His ranch and the woman who'd saved his cattle. A rider approached from the south. Well-dressed. Man on a fine horse. Arthur recognized the type. Money and power wrapped in expensive clothes. Mr. Morgan? The rider dismounted. Joel Miller. I own the Triple M ranch east of here. Arthur nodded. He'd heard of Miller. Big operation. Lots of land and lots of influence. Heard you might be having some difficulties. Miller's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. Wanted to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Miller pulled out a leather wallet. I'm expanding my operations. Always looking for good ranchers. To work for me. Your place would make a fine line cabin. Arthur studied the man's face. You want to buy my ranch? I want to buy your problems. Miller counted out bills. More money than Arthur had seen in years. This covers your debts, gives you a fresh start. All you have to do is walk away. Walk away from what? From the choices that are holding you back. Miller's eyes were cold as winter stars. From the woman who's costing you everything. Arthur stared at the money, enough to start over somewhere else. Enough to escape the trap that was closing around him. Think about it, Miller said. But don't think too long. Offers like this don't stay on the table forever. Miller mounted his horse and rode away. Arthur sat in the wagon, holding more money than his ranch was worth. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and change. He thought about Ellie, about her quiet strength, about the way she'd saved his cattle and taught him to read, about the trust that had grown between them. Arthur folded the money and put it in his shirt pocket. He'd think about it, but he already knew what his answer would be. The ride home took 3 hours. Storm clouds gathered overhead. Lightning flickered in the distance. Arthur pushed the horses hard, trying to stay ahead of the weather. He found Ellie in the barn, treating a sick calf. She looked up as he entered, her face bright with accomplishment. The fever broke, she said. He's going to make it. Arthur watched her work. Her hands were gentle but sure. She'd found purpose here. Found a place where she mattered. How did it go in town? She asked. Arthur unloaded the meager supplies. Could have gone better. Ellie's hands stilled. She'd learned to read his moods. What happened? Nothing that can't be handled. But even as he said it, Arthur knew it wasn't true. The storm was coming. In the sky above and in the world beyond his ranch. The only question was whether they'd be strong enough to weather it. Thunder rolled across the valley. The first drops of rain began to fall. Arthur and Ellie worked together to secure the animals. 2 people against the approaching storm. 2 people who'd found something worth fighting for. The rain came harder. Arthur stood in the barn doorway, watching lightning split the sky. In his pocket, Miller's money waited. The easy way out. The path that led away from everything he'd built. He thought about Dutch's words. About the choices that defined a man. About the difference between surviving and living. The storm raged through the night. But in the morning, the sun would rise again. And Arthur would still be here. The trouble started small. A fence post cut during the night. Cattle wandering onto the road. A water trough overturned for no reason. Arthur found the first cut fence on a Tuesday morning. The wire had been snipped clean through. Not broken by an animal or worn by weather. Cut by human hands with deliberate precision. He repaired it without saying anything to Ellie. No point in worrying her over something that might have been random mischief. But his gut told him different. His gut told him this was just the beginning. 3 days later, another fence. This time closer to the house. Arthur counted the posts. 7 sections cut. Too many to be coincidence. Too precise to be accident. Ellie noticed his tension that evening. She was teaching him to write his name, guiding his fingers across the paper. His hand shook as he formed the letters. "Something's wrong," she said. Arthur set down the pencil. "Just tired. You're scared." The word hung between them. Arthur had been many things in his life: angry, desperate, foolish. But scared was something he didn't admit to. "Not scared," he said. "Careful." Ellie's eyes searched his face. She'd learned to read the signs. The way he checked the windows before lighting the lamp. The way he kept his rifle closer than usual. "Tell me what's happening." Arthur walked to the window. The desert stretched away under starlight. Peaceful and quiet. Too quiet for a night when the cattle should be moving. "Someone's been cutting fences." "Moving the herd. Miller's men?" Arthur turned back to her. "Maybe. Or maybe just folks who think we don't belong together." The next morning brought fresh evidence. Boot prints near the barn. Cigarette butts where someone had been watching. Arthur followed the trail to a ridge overlooking the ranch. 3 men had been there, watching for hours. Arthur studied the prints, memorizing the patterns. One man favored his left foot, another wore expensive boots. The third had a nail in his heel. He rode back to the ranch with cold certainty settling. In his chest, this wasn't random harassment. This was planned. Professional. Someone wanted him gone. Ellie was in the corral, working with the horses. She'd fashioned a mounting block that let her get onto the gentler animals. Her legs couldn't grip the saddle, but her hands were strong. She'd learned to balance using her core and her arms. "We need to talk," Arthur said. She guided the horse to the fence and dismounted. Her movements were fluid now, confident. She'd found ways to adapt that surprised him daily. "Someone's been watching us," he continued. "Professional men. Not just troublemakers." Ellie's jaw tightened. "Miller, likely, or Dutch, or both." Arthur helped her down from the fence. "They want me to give up the ranch. Want you gone. So what do we do?" Arthur had been thinking about that all morning. The smart thing would be to take Miller's money and leave. Start over somewhere else, somewhere no one knew their history. But running felt like dying, and he was tired of dying in small pieces. "We make ourselves harder to get rid of," he said. That afternoon, Arthur rode to town. Not to Peterson's store or Dutch's office. He rode to the telegraph office and sent 3 messages. Short words that cost more than he could afford. The replies came back within hours. Old debts called in. Favors owed from his darker days. Help was coming, but it would take time. He returned to the ranch as the sun touched the mountains. Ellie was waiting in the barn, her face tight with worry. "Where did you go?" "To even the odds." That night, they worked by lamplight. Arthur had brought paper and ink from town. Ellie was teaching him to write letters. Real letters with paragraphs and proper spelling. "Education is the one thing they can't take from you," she said. "No matter what happens, you'll always have the words." Arthur's hand moved across the paper. The letters were crooked but clear. He was writing about the ranch, about the land and the cattle and the life he'd built here. "Why is this so important to you?" he asked. Ellie set down her pencil. "Because you saved my life. Because you saw worth in me when no one else did. Because you gave me a place to belong." Arthur looked at her across the small table. Lamplight played across her face. She was beautiful, but that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the steel in her eyes. The quiet strength that had carried her through abandonment and loss. "You saved my cattle," he said. "Taught me to read. Made this place feel less empty. Then we're even." "No." Arthur's voice was quiet. "We're partners." The words settled between them. Partners. Not employer and employee. Not charity and recipient. Partners in something bigger than either of them alone. Outside, the wind picked up. Arthur heard the cattle moving restlessly. He reached for his rifle, but Ellie's hand stopped him. "Wait," she said. "Listen." Arthur strained his ears. The sound came again. Not cattle, horses, moving fast across the desert, coming from the direction of town. "How many?" Ellie asked. "3, maybe 4. Arthur blew out the lamp. They sat in darkness, listening to the hoofbeats grow closer. The horses stopped at the edge of the ranch. Voices carried on the night air. Barns got a light. "Not anymore. They know we're here." Arthur recognized the voice. One of Miller's men, the one with the expensive boots. "What do we do?" Ellie whispered. Arthur checked his rifle. Don't run." The horses moved closer. Arthur could see shapes in the darkness. 3 riders circling the house, looking for the best approach. "Morgan," one of them called out. "We need to talk." Arthur moved to the window. "Talk from where you are. This is business. Come out peaceable. State your business. Mr. Miller's got a new offer. Better than the last one." Arthur felt Ellie's hand on his arm. Her touch was steady, calming. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. "Not interested," he called back. "You sure about that? Things are about to get difficult for you." "Already difficult." One of the riders laughed. "This is nothing, Morgan. Wait until we really get started." The horses moved away, but Arthur knew they'd be back. This was just the beginning. The real pressure was yet to come. He lit the lamp again. Ellie was watching him, her face calm despite the threat outside. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Arthur set down the rifle. "What? I'm not helpless. I'm not poor. I'm not what you think I am. What are you then?" Ellie reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather pouch. She opened it and poured coins onto the table. Gold coins. More than Arthur had ever seen in one place. "I'm someone who can help. You fight back," she said, "if you'll let me." Arthur stared at the gold. Enough to hire men, buy supplies, turn the tide of whatever war was coming. "Where did this come from?" "My father. He was more than a doctor. He was a successful doctor, with successful investments." Ellie's voice carried old pain. "I was his only child, his only heir. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to. Be sure that you saw me as a person, not as a problem to be solved or a prize to be won." Arthur picked up one of the coins. It was warm from her touch. "Real gold, real hope. What do you want to do with it?" "I want to save this ranch. I want to build something here, something that matters." Arthur nodded. The war was coming whether they wanted it or not. But now they had weapons to fight back. Outside, the desert. Wind carried the scent of storm clouds. Change was coming to their small corner of the world. Change that would test everything they'd built together. But for the first time since Miller's visit, Arthur felt hope stirring in his chest. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were partners with the means to fight back. The gold gleamed in the lamplight. Tomorrow they'd start planning their counterattack. Joel Miller arrived at dawn with 6 armed men. They rode in formation across the desert, raising dust clouds that darkened the morning sky. Arthur watched them approach from the barn doorway, his rifle cradled in his arms. Ellie sat beside him on a wooden crate, her own weapon across her lap. She'd proven herself a skilled shot during their practice sessions. Her hands were steady. Her aim was true. The woman who'd been abandoned in the desert had become someone who could defend herself. "That's a lot of firepower for a business meeting," she said. Arthur counted the riders again. Miller in the lead on his black stallion. 5 hired guns. Behind him, men who wore their weapons easy and their morals loose. "Miller's done talking," Arthur replied. The riders stopped 50 yards from the house. Close enough to make their point, far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. Miller dismounted and walked forward alone. His expensive boots crushed the dried grass. "Arthur!" Miller's voice carried across the distance. "Time to be reasonable." Arthur stepped into the sunlight. "I'm listening. My offer's still good. Cash money for your property. All you have to do is walk away. And if I don't?" Miller's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then things get complicated." Arthur felt Ellie's presence behind him, solid, unwavering. She'd made her choice to stand with him. Now he had to make his. "I'm staying," Arthur called back. Miller's expression hardened. "You sure about that?" "Look around, Arthur. Look at what you're fighting for." Arthur did look. The ranch spread before him in the morning light. Modest buildings, grazing cattle, water tanks filled by the windmill. Not much by most standards, but it was his, built with his own hands, paid for with his own sweat. "I'm sure." "Then you're a fool." Miller signaled to his men. "Last chance, Arthur. Take the money and ride out. Both of you." Arthur raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone, just making it visible. "We're not going anywhere." Miller's laugh was cold as winter stone. "Have it your way." The riders wheeled their horses and galloped away. But Arthur knew they'd be back. This was just the opening move in a game that would end badly for someone. He turned to find Ellie watching him with unreadable eyes. "You could have taken the money," she said. "Could have. It would have been easier." Arthur leaned his rifle against the barn wall. Easy ain't always right. That afternoon, they prepared for siege. Arthur reinforced the barn doors. Ellie inventoried their ammunition. They had enough food for a week, enough water for longer, but enough resolve for whatever was coming remained to be seen. "Why are you really doing this?" Ellie asked while they worked. Arthur paused in his hammering. "What do you mean?" "You could take Miller's money and start over, find another ranch, another life." Her voice carried genuine curiosity. "Why fight? For this place?" Arthur set down his hammer. The question had been eating at him for days. Why was he risking everything for a few hundred acres of desert? "Because running away is what I've done my whole life," he said. "Run from responsibility. Run from commitment. Run from anything that mattered. And now? Now I found something worth staying for." Ellie's eyes searched his face. "The ranch?" "The ranch, you, the life we built here." Arthur's voice was quiet but firm. "Maybe it ain't much, but it's ours." Evening brought the first real attack. Not on the ranch itself, but on everything. That kept it running. The windmill stopped turning. Someone had damaged the gears. The water tanks began to empty. Arthur and Ellie worked by moonlight to repair the damage. Delicate work that required both of them. She held the lantern while he wrestled with the mechanical parts. Her medical training helped her understand the intricate machinery. "They're trying to force us out without direct confrontation," she said. "Make life impossible so we'll leave on our own." "Smart strategy. Will it work?" Arthur tightened the last bolt. The windmill creaked back to life. "Not if we're smarter." The next morning brought fresh troubles. Their cattle had been driven onto Miller's land during the night. Recovering them would mean trespassing. Not recovering them meant losing half their herd. Arthur stood at the property line, studying the situation. The cattle grazed peacefully in Miller's pasture. Miller's men watched from a distant ridge, waiting to see what Arthur would do. "It's a trap," Ellie said. She'd ridden out with him using the special saddle he'd built. "They want you to cross that fence." Arthur knew she was right. The moment he stepped onto Miller's land, he'd be the aggressor. Miller would be justified in defending his property, with weapons if necessary. "Can't just leave them," Arthur said. "Can't save them if you're dead." Arthur studied the fence line. The wire was new, expensive. Miller had money to burn on this fight. Arthur had determination and little else. "There's another way," Ellie said. Arthur turned to her. "What?" "Miller thinks he's fighting a desperate rancher. He doesn't know about my resources, My connections. What connections? Ellie pulled a letter from her saddlebag. My father knew influential people, judges, politicians, men who valued justice over profit. Arthur read the letter. It was addressed to a federal judge in the territorial capital. The language was formal, but the message was clear. Ellie's father had friends in high places. This could work, Arthur said. It will work. But it means revealing who I really am. My full name. My family's reputation. Ellie's voice carried old pain. I came west to escape that life, to be judged on my own merits. And now? Now I'm willing to use every advantage I have to save what we built. That evening, Arthur found Ellie in the barn, writing letters. By lamplight. Her handwriting was elegant, educated, the script of someone raised with privilege and opportunity. Having second thoughts? He asked. Ellie looked up from her work. About using my family's influence? No, about staying here and fighting? Never, even if it gets dangerous, especially then. Ellie set down her pen. I was abandoned once. Left to die because I was inconvenient. I won't let that happen again. Arthur sat beside her on the wooden crate. What if we lose? Then, we lose fighting for something that mattered. That's more than most people can say. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. The sound echoed across the desert, wild and lonely. Arthur had always identified with that sound. The call of something that belonged nowhere and everywhere. But tonight he felt different. Tonight he had a place to belong. A reason to fight. A partner who saw worth in him when the rest of the world saw only problems. Tell me about your father, he said. Ellie's expression softened. He was a good man, a brilliant doctor. He saved lives because he could, not because he had to. Sounds like his daughter. He would have liked you. Would have respected what you're trying to do here. Arthur picked up one of her letters. The address was written in careful script. The Honorable Judge William Foster. Territorial Court. Important people who could change the course of their fight. How long before we hear back? A week. Maybe less. Ellie folded the letters and sealed them with wax. But Miller won't wait. He'll escalate before then. Arthur nodded. The next few days would test everything they'd built. Their partnership, their resolve, their belief that some things were worth fighting for. Whatever happens, he said, I'm glad you're here. Ellie smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in days. Where else would I be? The question hung in the air between them. Where else indeed? She could be anywhere. Had the money and connections to go anywhere, but she'd chosen to stay here. To fight beside him for a future neither of them had imagined. Outside, the wind picked up. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Change was coming to their corner of the desert. Change that would test everything they'd built together. But for tonight, they had each other. They had a plan. They had hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, they had light and warmth and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Arthur helped Ellie prepare for the ride to town. The letters had to be posted. The wheels of justice had to start turning. Their counterattack was about to begin. Arthur and Ellie rode into Deadwood Springs at noon. The sun blazed overhead, casting sharp shadows between the buildings. Every face turned to watch them pass. Word had spread fast about the standoff with Miller. Arthur kept his eyes forward. His rifle rested across his saddle. Ellie rode beside him on the horse he'd trained for her. Her back was straight. Her chin was high. She looked nothing like the woman who'd been abandoned in desert. They stopped in front of the town hall. Dutch stood on the steps, flanked by his supporters. Miller waited in the shade of the general store. His hired guns lounged against the building, hands near their weapons. Arthur! Dutch called out. Come to see reason? Arthur dismounted. Come to have a conversation. Conversation's over. Time for action. The crowd pressed closer. Men and women who'd known Arthur for years, who'd bought his cattle and borrowed his tools. Their faces showed no friendship now, only fear and suspicion. "You brought this trouble on yourself," Dutch continued. "All you had to do was follow the rules." "Whose rules?" Arthur asked. "Civilized rules, proper rules." Arthur helped Ellie down from her horse. She moved with quiet dignity, ignoring the stares and whispers. Her presence changed the dynamic, made this about more than just land and money. "I got something to say," Arthur announced. Dutch laughed. "Say it and get out." Arthur looked at the faces around him. People he'd known for years. People who'd turned against him because he'd chosen compassion over convention. "Some of you know me," he said. "Know I've made mistakes, done things I ain't proud of. But I never abandoned someone to die." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Arthur had their attention now. This woman was left in the desert. Left to die because she was inconvenient. Because she was different. Arthur's voice carried across the square. "I couldn't live with that. Still can't. She's not your responsibility." Dutch shouted, "She's my partner." The word hit the crowd. Like a physical blow. Partner, not servant, not charity case. Partner. Miller stepped forward. "You're making a mistake, Arthur. Last chance to take my offer. I'm making a choice about what kind of man I want to be." Miller's smile was cold. "The kind who loses everything for nothing. The kind who stands up for what's right." Ellie urged her horse forward. She'd been quiet through the confrontation, but now she spoke. Her voice carried the authority of education and breeding. "My name is Eleanor Washington," she said. "My father was Dr. Marcus Washington of Philadelphia. Some of you may have heard of him." The crowd stirred. Washington was a name that carried weight even in the desert. A name associated with wealth and influence. "I came west to start over. To be judged on my own merits rather than my family's reputation." Ellie's eyes swept the crowd. "I was abandoned by people who saw me as a burden. Saved by a man who saw me as a human being." Dutch's face had gone pale. "You're lying." Ellie pulled out a leather portfolio. "I have letters here. From Judge Foster. From Senator Harrison. From other influential men who knew my father." She handed one of the letters to Arthur. He read it aloud, his voice growing stronger with each word. The letter confirmed her identity, praised her character, demanded justice for any wrongs done to her. "Furthermore," Ellie continued, "I have documentation of Mr. Miller's illegal activities. His scheme to drive out small ranchers. His bribery of local officials." Miller's face darkened. "You can't prove anything." "I can prove everything." Ellie's voice was steady as stone. "My father taught me to keep careful records, to document injustice wherever I found it." She produced another document, a detailed account of the land grab scheme, names, dates, amounts of money changed hands. The paper rustled in the desert wind. "This ends now," she said. "The harassment, the intimidation, the corruption." Dutch stepped forward. "You think some papers scare us? I think federal judges scare you. I think congressional investigations scare you. I think losing everything you've stolen scares you." The crowd was shifting now. The certainty in their faces was cracking. Some looked ashamed. Others looked angry. All looked confused. Miller played his last card. "Even if this is true, what's it matter? You're still just a woman who can't walk, still just a burden." Arthur's hand moved to his gun, but Ellie's voice stopped him. "You're right," she said. "I can't walk, but I can think, I can plan. I can fight." She gestured to the papers in her hands. "I can bring down corrupt men who prey on the weak. You can't prove I've broken any laws. I can prove you've conspired to deny citizens their legal rights. I can prove you've used intimidation and fraud to steal property. I can prove you've bribed officials to ignore your crimes. Miller's composure cracked. You're bluffing. I'm offering you a choice. Ellie's voice was calm as deep water. Return the stolen property. Compensate the farmers you've cheated. Leave this territory or face federal prosecution. And if I refuse, then you'll learn what it feels like to be abandoned, to lose everything, to be left with nothing. The silence stretched across the square. Miller looked at his hired guns, at Dutch, at the crowd that no longer seemed so supportive. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Ellie replied. It is. Miller signaled to his men. They mounted their horses and rode out of town. The dust of their departure hung in the air like a funeral shroud. Dutch tried to rally the crowd one last time. This changes nothing. These people don't belong here. But the fight had gone out of him. The crowd began to disperse. Some approached Arthur and Ellie with apologies. Others slipped away in shame. Peterson emerged from his store. Your credit's good again, Arthur. Sorry about the misunderstanding. Arthur nodded. No hard feelings. But there were hard feelings. There always would be. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Some betrayals cut too deep. As the sun began to set, Arthur and Ellie rode back to their ranch. The desert stretched before them, painted gold and purple by the dying light. Behind them, the town of Deadwood Springs tried to forget what it had learned about itself. What now? Arthur asked. Now we build something better, something that lasts. They rode in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found their place in the world. Two people who'd learned that belonging wasn't about what others thought. It was about what you were willing to fight for. The ranch appeared in the distance. Modest buildings, grazing cattle, a windmill turning in the evening breeze. Home. Arthur helped Ellie down from her horse. She stood beside him, looking out over the land they'd fought to keep. The land they'd earned through struggle and sacrifice. Your father would be proud, Arthur said. So would yours. They walked toward the house together. Arthur's steps were measured. Ellie's movements were fluid despite her disability. 2. People moving forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. Inside, Arthur lit the lamp. Ellie spread her medical books on the table. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sick animals to heal, fences to repair, a life to build. But tonight they had peace. They had each other. They had a place to belong. Arthur opened one of his reading books. Ellie prepared to correct his pronunciation. Simple domestic tasks that meant everything because they were shared. Outside, the desert wind sang through the sage, the sound of freedom, the sound of home. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.